Asian billionaire CEO angry with 50 experts, until the black maid's son surprised him in ancient Mandarin. When 50 of the world's greatest minds failed, wisdom arrived in the most unexpected form. In the doorway of the Silicon Valley penthouse, a little kid with penetrating eyes held a secret no one could imagine. He wasn't supposed to enter the boardroom. He wasn't supposed to comprehend ancient texts that predated modern civilization. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're watching from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Now let's continue. The evening fog rolled through Silicon Valley's hills as James Park stood in his penthouse office, his jaw clenched so tight it hurt. 50 specialists, 50 of the world's most renowned sinologists, medical historians, and ancient language experts. And not one, not a single one, could decipher the medical scrolls that held the key to defending his family's pharmaceutical empire. "Impossible," he growled, hurling his tablet across the room. It shattered against the display screen, leaving a spider web of cracks across the projected image of a 200-year-old scroll. How can documents from my own ancestors be unreadable? How? His assistant Ethan Brooks stood frozen by the doorway, files clutched to his chest like a shield. "Sir, Dr. Warren from Oxford says the dialect is too obscure, too ancient. The medical terminology predates known records. She suggests we—" "Suggest?" James spun around, his dark eyes blazing. "I don't pay people to suggest. I pay them to deliver results. The lawsuit hearing is in 60 days. 60 days, Ethan."
"If we can't prove my great-great-grandfather created that formula, MedFarm Global takes everything. The company, the research, all of it. $2.8 billion they're demanding."
At 42, James Park had built his empire with ruthless precision. He'd transformed a $10 million inheritance into a $4.2 billion pharmaceutical giant through sheer force of will and calculated strategy. He demanded perfection, accepted nothing less than excellence, and had no patience for failure. His custom Italian suit, worth more than most people's annual salaries, couldn't hide the tension radiating from his lean frame. 8 months divorced, no children, emotionally detached from everyone, he'd lived by his father's harsh philosophy. Emotion is weakness, logic is power. The company his great-great-grandfather Park Jin-woo had founded in 1823 during the Qing dynasty now stood on the precipice of destruction. The ancient medical scrolls displayed across his office in climate-controlled cases and on specialized screens contained the revolutionary 5 elements formula, the foundation of Park Pharmaceuticals' flagship product. But without translation, without proof of original creation, the rival corporation's lawsuit would strip everything away. "Perhaps we could—" Ethan began, but movement in the doorway cut him short. Diane Johnson, the housekeeper, appeared with her son's small hand clasped in hers. The woman's face was apologetic, almost fearful. "Mr. Park, I'm so sorry to disturb you. There was an emergency at Malcolm's after-school program, and I had to bring him here. I promise we'll stay in the kitchen and—" "Not now!" James barked, barely glancing at them. "Can't you see I'm in the middle of something critical?" But the little boy didn't flinch. Malcolm, just 8 years old, stood perfectly still, his intelligent eyes fixed not on James's angry face, but on the ancient scrolls displayed across the massive projection screen. Small for his age, he'd moved from Southside Atlanta with his mother 9 months ago, seeking better opportunities in California. Even from the doorway, even at his height, something about those faded characters had captured his complete attention. "Mama," Malcolm whispered, his voice barely audible. "Those papers, they're not quiet anymore." James stopped mid-pace, his anger momentarily replaced by confusion. "What nonsense is this?"
Diane's face flushed with embarrassment. "Malcolm, hush. Mr. Park is very busy. We'll wait downstairs." She tugged gently at her son's hand, but the child didn't move. "They want to speak," Malcolm continued, still staring at the scrolls with an intensity that seemed impossible for someone so young. "They've been waiting so long to tell their story." Something in his tone, not childish fantasy, but quiet certainty, made James pause. He studied the boy properly for the first time since Diane had started working for him. Small for his age, dark skin, quiet demeanor, but eyes that seemed to hold something ancient, something knowing. "The papers want to speak." James's voice dripped with skepticism, but there was a flicker of curiosity now. "And what exactly do these ancient papers want to say to you, boy?" Diane's grip tightened on her son's shoulder. "Sir, please forgive him. He has a very vivid imagination. We'll go right now." "No." James raised his hand, his business instinct overriding his irritation. He'd built his fortune by recognizing opportunities others missed, by looking where others didn't think to look. And right now, with 50 experts having failed him and 60 days remaining, what did he have to lose? "Let him speak. Tell me, Malcolm, what do these ancient words say to you?" Malcolm finally met his eyes, and for a brief moment, James felt something shift in the air around them, as if the child saw right through his anger, his desperation, his fear. The boy walked forward slowly, almost reverently, until he stood before the enormous projection screen. His small fingers reached out, hovering near the display, but not quite touching it. "This one," Malcolm said, pointing to a scroll covered in elaborate characters that had stumped every expert. "It talks about healing, about a medicine made from roots that grow where the mountain tigers sleep, and berries blessed by the autumn moon." The room fell absolutely silent. Ethan's files slipped from his fingers, scattering across the polished concrete floor. Diane's face had gone pale, her hand now covering her mouth in shock. James felt his heart hammer against his ribs. The mountain where tigers sleep. Berries blessed by the autumn moon. Those specific poetic descriptions appeared in his confidential family records, documents only he and his late father had known. No one outside the Park family inner circle knew those details. They'd never been digitized, never shared with the legal team, never spoken aloud in this office. "How?" His voice came out rough, barely controlled. "How could you possibly know that?" Malcolm looked up at him with eyes that seemed too old for his young face. "Because the whispers tell me. The healers who wrote these words want to be heard again. They've been silent for too long." James sank slowly into his chair, his mind racing through impossibilities, his carefully constructed logical world tilting on its axis. This couldn't be happening. An 8-year-old child from Southside Atlanta with no Chinese language training couldn't read what 50 world-class experts couldn't decipher. It was impossible. And yet, "Tell me more," he whispered, leaning forward. "Tell me everything these scrolls are whispering." Malcolm's small voice filled the room, reciting phrases in flawless ancient Mandarin that he shouldn't even know existed. Medical formulas flowed from his lips with precise measurements and preparation methods, ingredient ratios, harvest timing, every detail matching James's family archives perfectly. Diane stared in shock, her hand still covering her mouth, unable to comprehend what her son was doing. Ethan frantically grabbed his phone, recording every word, his expression a mixture of awe and disbelief. And James Park, the man who'd built an empire on logic and data, on measurable reality and calculated risk, realized that everything he thought he understood about the world was about to change. This impossible boy might be the only one who could save everything he'd built. But how? And why?
James didn't sleep that night. He spent hours in his study, reviewing Malcolm's translations against his family's private archives. Every detail matched perfectly, not just approximately, but exactly, including nuances and poetic phrasings no outsider could possibly know. The boy had recited medical formulas with precision that would require decades of specialized study, yet he was 8 years old and had never been exposed to classical Chinese. His penthouse felt different now, as if reality itself had shifted. The minimalist space that once represented control and order now felt like a carefully constructed illusion, suddenly revealed as fragile. At 7 a.m., James summoned Diane and Malcolm back to the penthouse. Diane Johnson was 34, a single mother who'd moved to Silicon Valley 9 months ago after losing her job in Atlanta. She worked multiple cleaning positions to support Malcolm, living in a small apartment in East Palo Alto. Malcolm's father had been absent since before his birth. When James had hired Diane through an agency, she'd been professional, quiet, never intrusive, keeping perfect distance between employer and employee. Now that distance was about to collapse. When they arrived, Ethan Brooks had already prepared a private workspace. The efficient assistant had set up a climate-controlled room with child-appropriate furniture, soft lighting, and the original scrolls brought from the vault under maximum security. James's lead attorney, David Kim, waited with his legal team, tablets ready. And seated in the corner, observing quietly, was Dr. Sarah Chen, a pediatric neurologist from Stanford, whom James had contacted at 5 a.m. "Mrs. Johnson," James began, his voice more measured than yesterday's fury. "I'd like to understand what happened. With your permission, I'd like to test Malcolm's abilities more thoroughly." Diane's protective instinct flared immediately. "Test him? Mr. Park, I don't know what happened yesterday, but Malcolm is just a child. I won't have him treated like some laboratory experiment." "I understand your concern," James said, and surprisingly, he meant it. "Dr. Chen is here to ensure Malcolm's well-being. We'll proceed gently, with breaks whenever he needs them, but if his ability is genuine, Mrs. Johnson, he might save my company, and in return, I'll ensure both your futures are secure." He outlined his proposal. Triple Diane's salary, establish an educational trust for Malcolm, legal protections for both of them. Diane hesitated, searching his face for deception or exploitation. What she found instead was desperation mixed with something she hadn't expected, genuine care. "All right," she said finally, "but I stay with him the entire time." Malcolm sat at the small desk, calm in a way that unnerved James. The boy showed no anxiety, no awareness of the impossibility of what he'd done. Ethan had thoughtfully provided colored pencils and drawing paper for breaks. James presented a different scroll, one Malcolm had never seen. "Can you read this one?" Malcolm studied it quietly. No hesitation, no uncertainty. Then he began translating in that same clear, certain voice. "This one is about treating respiratory illness. The healer says to use honeysuckle flowers picked at dawn, combined with licorice root in a ratio of 3:1. Steep in water heated to the temperature where small bubbles first appear, not boiling. The harvest must happen in the 5th lunar month, when the flowers hold the most healing essence." David Kim cross-referenced the translation against the family archives. His expression shifted from skepticism to shock. "It's a 100% accurate match, down to the specific temperature description and lunar timing." Dr. Chen leaned forward, her scientific fascination visible. "Malcolm, can you explain how you do this? What's happening in your mind when you read these scrolls?" Malcolm struggled to articulate. "It's like the words have voices, not loud, but clear. They whisper what they mean." He paused, thinking. "The healer who wrote this was worried about children. I can feel his concern. He lost his own daughter to lung fever, so he worked hard to find a cure for other families. Dr. Chen checked her notes, then gasped softly. Historical records confirmed that the scroll's author had indeed lost a child to respiratory illness. There was no way Malcolm could have known that. James's skepticism warred with mounting evidence. His entire worldview, built on logic and data and measurable reality, couldn't accommodate what he was witnessing. Yet the evidence was undeniable. Over the next several hours, Malcolm translated 5 more scrolls. Each translation was perfect, revealing medical formulas and knowledge that had been locked away for 2 centuries. He worked calmly, methodically, taking breaks to draw with the colored pencils Ethan had provided. His drawings were remarkable. Detailed sketches of herbs, mountains, rivers he'd never seen. Dr. Chen conducted cognitive tests during the breaks. Brain activity normal except for unusual patterns in language processing centers. No medical explanation for his abilities. Then Malcolm approached the core scroll, the one that mattered most. "This is the important one," he said softly. "The 5 elements, healing formula." He began to read, and James felt his breath catch. Malcolm listed ingredients with poetic descriptions that sent chills down his spine. Ginseng from the mountain where tigers sleep, goji berries blessed by the autumn moon, roots of the tree that weeps silver, seeds from flowers that bloom in snow, water from the spring that reflects stars. Those exact phrases appeared in James's father's private journal, shared with James before his death 3 years ago. Documents never digitized, never shown to anyone. Only James knew them. Impossible. James watched Malcolm work, his mind reeling. He remembered his father once saying, "Some knowledge lives in blood and bone, passed through generations in ways science cannot measure." James had dismissed it as poetic nonsense, the sentimentality of an aging man. Now he wasn't certain of anything. Malcolm looked up from the scroll, meeting James's eyes. "Mr. Park, the healer who made this formula, he's your family, isn't he?" James nodded, his throat tight. "He was kind," Malcolm said simply. "I can feel it in his words. He wanted to help people who were suffering." A pause, then something that pierced James's carefully constructed armor. He'd be sad that people are fighting over his medicine now. He wanted it to heal, not cause pain. For the first time in years, James felt emotion beyond anger or ambition. Shame, regret, recognition that somewhere along the way he'd lost sight of why his ancestor had created the formula in the first place. Dr. Chen stood, reviewing her extensive notes. "Mr. Park, I need to be direct with you. Malcolm's abilities are scientifically inexplicable, but they're empirically genuine. I can document what he does, but I cannot explain how he does it." David Kim closed his tablet. "We have enough translations to begin building our legal defense. The detail and accuracy are irrefutable. If we can authenticate these translations independently, we can win this case." But Malcolm suddenly went still. His head tilted, as if listening to something only he could hear. "There's one more," he whispered. "One more scroll that belongs with these, but it's far away." James leaned forward. "Far away where?" "Across the ocean, with someone old, someone who's been waiting." Malcolm's young face creased with concentration. "The scroll is calling, but it's so faint. It's been alone for so long." The room fell silent. James realized with sudden clarity that they'd only found part of the answer. The complete truth lay somewhere else, with someone unexpected. And somehow, this impossible boy was the only one who could hear its call. Diane put a protective hand on Malcolm's shoulder. "Honey, what do you mean? What scroll?" "The one that makes all the others complete," Malcolm said.
like the last piece of a puzzle. Without it, the story isn't finished. And the story needs to be finished, Mama. It's been waiting too long to be whole again. James met David Kim's eyes. His attorney's expression reflected his own thoughts. This was impossible. They couldn't chase across the world based on an 8-year-old's mysterious intuition. Yet everything Malcolm had said so far had been true. Where across the ocean? James asked quietly. Can you tell me more? Malcolm closed his eyes. Somewhere with old buildings and mountains. Somewhere that smells like home to you even though you left. His eyes opened, ancient wisdom in a child's face. The scroll knows you're looking now. It's been keeping itself safe, waiting for the right time. And the person who has it, they've been waiting too. James felt something shift in his chest. Soul. Malcolm was describing Seoul, where James's grandfather had lived, where the Park family's roots ran deep. But who would have the missing scroll, and how could Malcolm possibly know it existed? I need to make some calls, James said, standing abruptly. His mind was already racing through possibilities, contacts in Korea, family members he'd neglected for years in his single-minded pursuit of profit. As Diane prepared to take Malcolm home, the boy turned back to James. Don't wait too long, Mr. Park. The scroll is very old, and so is the person keeping it safe. Some things can't wait forever. The words carried a weight that made James's carefully controlled world feel even more precarious. Everything was about to change. He could feel it. 3 days had passed since Malcolm's revelation about the missing scroll. James's legal team worked frantically, preparing their defense with the existing translations. David Kim had assembled an impressive case based on what Malcolm had already deciphered. But James couldn't shake the boy's words. It's calling from across the ocean. His logical mind insisted this was impossible. Chasing halfway around the world based on an 8-year-old's mystical intuition defied every business principle he'd ever followed. Yet Malcolm had been right about everything else, every impossible thing. James tasked Ethan with researching family history, digging deeper than corporate records and estate documents. He contacted relatives in Seoul he hadn't spoken to in years, awkward conversations with aunts and uncles who barely recognized his voice. His Aunt Park Ji-won provided the crucial information. Your grandfather had a mentor, she said over the crackling international line. Professor Min Soo-jin. She specialized in traditional medicine and ancient texts. They were very close before he died. Is she still alive? James asked, his pulse quickening. Yes, 87 years old now, still living in Seoul, in the old Hanok in Bukchon village. Your grandfather trusted her with many things. The phone call to Professor Min was arranged through his aunt. When the elderly woman answered, her voice was weak but sharp, cutting through pleasantries with surgical precision. Park Dae-jung's grandson, she said, not a question, but an assessment. Your grandfather would be disappointed in what you've become. All business, no heart. The words stung more than James expected. Professor Min, I'm facing a crisis, a lawsuit that could destroy my company. I've discovered ancient scrolls, and there's a child who can translate them. He says there's one more scroll, hidden across the ocean, with someone who's been waiting. A long silence on the line. Then, a child who hears the ancestors. Your grandfather said one would come. James's pulse raced. What do you mean? Professor Min's voice softened with memory. 40 years ago, your grandfather entrusted me with a scroll, an imperial patent from the Qing dynasty. He said, keep this safe until the right time. You'll know when that time comes. I pressed him. How will I know? He said, when a child who hears what others cannot come seeking it, then the time has arrived. She paused, and James heard the rustle of paper, the creak of old wood. I thought him superstitious, poetic in his old age. But I kept my promise, never revealed the scroll's existence to anyone. Now you call me about a boy who translates impossible texts. Perhaps your grandfather knew something we didn't. I need to see that scroll, James said. It could save everything. Then come to Seoul, Professor Min replied. If this matters enough, you'll make the journey. If not, the scroll stays hidden. And bring the child. I want to meet him. David Kim was adamant in his objection. James, we have 50 days left. You can't waste 3 of them flying to Korea on a mystical hunch. We have enough translations to build a solid defense. But something in James had shifted. The careful calculation that had governed his entire life felt suddenly insufficient. Arrange the flight. We leave tomorrow, all 3 of us. His staff was shocked. James Park never made impulsive decisions, never operated on intuition over data. Yet here he was, flying across the Pacific on the word of an 8-year-old boy. Diane was nervous about international travel. She'd never left the country, never imagined she would. But James provided first-class arrangements, proper documentation, everything handled with quiet efficiency. Malcolm was calm, almost excited. The scroll is happy we're coming, he said while packing his small backpack. It's been waiting so long. The 12-hour flight to Seoul felt both endless and too short. Malcolm sat by the window, drawing pictures of mountains and temples he'd never seen. James watched him, fascinated and unsettled by the boy's serene certainty. Diane shared more about Malcolm's childhood during the flight, her voice low beneath the engine's hum. He's always been different. When he was little, he'd speak in his sleep using languages I didn't recognize. Once he described a market in detail, the smells, the vendors, the layout. Later, I saw a documentary about a traditional Korean market. It was exactly what he'd described. He'd never seen it before. She looked at her sleeping son. Teachers suggested testing for autism, for learning disabilities, for everything. All the tests came back normal. He's just different. I stopped trying to explain it. They arrived in Seoul as dawn broke over the city. James hadn't been back in 5 years, not since his father's funeral. The city felt both familiar and foreign, modernized beyond his memories, yet still carrying echoes of his childhood visits. Malcolm stepped off the plane and went completely still. "It's louder here," he whispered. "So many old voices." They checked into a luxury hotel in the Gangnam district. Malcolm seemed overwhelmed by the density of history around him. The layers of time pressed into the ancient city's bones. The next morning, they took a taxi to Bukchon village. The traditional neighborhood sat nestled between modern Seoul's gleaming towers, a preserved pocket of old Korea with narrow lanes and hanok houses with their distinctive curved roofs. Professor Min's home was small but impeccably maintained. The elderly woman appeared in the doorway, tiny and sharp-eyed, studying them with an intensity that reminded James painfully of his grandfather, her gaze fixed on Malcolm. "So, you're the one who hears?" Malcolm bowed respectfully, just as Diane had taught him. "Yes, ma'am. The scrolls whisper to me." Professor Min's eyes filled with tears. "Your grandfather would have loved to meet you." Inside, the traditional Korean home was filled with books, scrolls, and medicinal herbs hanging to dry. The scent of ginseng and dried chrysanthemum filled the air. Professor Min served tea with hands that trembled slightly with age, but her voice remained steady. "Your great-great-grandfather, Park Jin-woo, was a healer," she began, looking at James. "Trained in both Korean and Chinese traditional medicine. He traveled to China during the Qing dynasty, studied under master physicians. During a plague outbreak, he created the 5 elements formula, saved thousands of lives. She poured tea into delicate porcelain cups. The Chinese emperor was so impressed that he granted Park Jin-woo an imperial patent, unprecedented for a foreigner. It gave your family exclusive rights to produce the formula, sealed with the emperor's own vermilion seal. "Why did my grandfather hide it?" James asked. Park Jin-woo brought the patent back to Korea and kept it hidden, fearing it would make his family a target for theft or political manipulation. He passed it to his son with instructions. Keep it safe. Share it only when absolutely necessary. The scroll passed through generations, always hidden, always protected. Professor Min's gaze grew distant. "Your grandfather gave it to me for safekeeping. He had a gift too, you know. Not like this boy's, but he could sense things others couldn't. He told me your great-great-grandmother had unusual linguistic abilities as well, could read medical texts in languages she'd never studied." She looked at Malcolm. "Your grandfather believed some souls carry ancient knowledge, that it appears when the family needs protection." Malcolm had been silent, listening with that intense focus. Suddenly, he spoke. "She's here." Everyone turned to him. "Your great-great-grandmother," Malcolm said, his eyes distant. "Not her spirit, but her echo, her knowing. It's in the walls here, in the scrolls. She wants you to understand." Professor Min's hand shook, tea spilling slightly into her saucer. "What does she want him to understand?" "That healing isn't about ownership or profit. It's about connection. The medicine works because it carries intention, love, the desire to help. That's what makes it powerful." Professor Min stood slowly, moving to a cabinet built into the wall. She pressed a hidden panel, revealing a compartment. From it, she withdrew an ancient wooden box, its surface worn smooth by centuries of careful handling. Inside, wrapped in red silk, lay the imperial patent scroll. The emperor's vermilion seal was visible even through the protective fabric. She handed it to Malcolm, not James. "Read it, child. Tell us what it says." Malcolm unrolled it carefully, his small hands steady despite the weight of history he held. His eyes scanned the characters, and then he began to translate, his voice clear and precise. "This is an official Qing dynasty document granting exclusive pharmaceutical production rights to Park Jin-woo and his bloodline descendants, in perpetuity, irrevocable, sealed by imperial authority." He continued, listing the 5 elements formula with complete specifications, including imperial physician testimonials about its effectiveness. Dated 1823, legal, binding, authenticated by the highest authority of its time. "But there's more," Malcolm said softly. A personal note added by Park Jin-woo himself, written in different ink, more intimate calligraphy. He read, "To my descendants who will hold this document, remember that healing is a sacred duty, not a business transaction. The formula I created saved lives during great suffering. Honor that purpose. Let profit serve healing, not the reverse. If you fight over this medicine, you dishonor those who were saved by it. Be worthy stewards." The words hit James like a physical blow. He'd spent years focused on profit margins, market share, stock prices. When had he last thought about the patients his medicine helped? When had healing become secondary to winning? Malcolm looked at him with those ancient eyes. "He's not angry with you, Mr. Park. He understands. But he's hoping you'll remember." Professor Min allowed them to take the imperial patent with proper documentation. She would testify to its provenance in court if needed. James held the scroll, feeling its weight. More than paper and ink, it was a legacy, a responsibility he'd forgotten he carried. Malcolm touched his arm gently. "The scrolls are happy now. They're all together again, telling their complete story." But as they prepared to leave,
James realized the real story wasn't about winning a lawsuit. It was about what he did after he won. The boy had given him back his company. Now the question remained, what kind of man would he be with it? They flew back to California with the imperial patent secured. James was quieter, more thoughtful than his staff had ever seen him. Something fundamental had shifted inside him. A crack in the armor he'd spent decades building. And Malcolm, drawing peacefully in the seat beside him, seemed to sense it all. Back in Silicon Valley, 35 days remained until the court deadline. The imperial patent needed authentication by independent experts before it could be presented as evidence. James's legal team arranged verification through multiple institutions, assembling credentials and provenance documentation. Everything was proceeding smoothly until David Kim entered James's office with grim news. MedFarm Global is demanding their own testing, he said. They want to challenge Malcolm's abilities directly. The court approved their request. James felt his jaw tighten. They're going after an 8-year-old child? They're desperate. They know if Malcolm's translations are verified, they lose everything. The setup was arranged at Stanford University's conference facility, neutral ground with proper security. 5 court-appointed experts were assembled. Dr. Richard Zhang, a Harvard sinologist, Dr. Kenji Yamamoto, a traditional Chinese medicine historian from Tokyo, Professor Liu Wei, a linguistics specialist from Beijing University, Dr. Patricia Hensworth, a Qing dynasty specialist, and Dr. Michael Foster, a child psychologist from Johns Hopkins. MedFarm Global's legal team would be present, and somehow media had gotten wind of the story. Miracle child translator headlines were already circulating. Cameras lined the street outside. Security was tight inside. Diane was terrified. They're going to make him into a spectacle, she said, her voice trembling as they prepared that morning. He's just a little boy, Mr. Park. What if they try to trick him? What if they make him feel like a freak? James found himself responding with unexpected protectiveness. I won't let them hurt him. We can stop this if you want. I'll find another way. Malcolm overheard from the doorway. It's okay, Mama. The scrolls want to be heard. I'm not scared. Diane looked at James, seeing genuine concern in his eyes, rather than calculated self-interest. She gave her consent, but insisted on staying close to Malcolm throughout. The conference room was set up with proper lighting and a child-sized chair at the testing table. The scrolls would be presented one at a time under glass protection, handled with archival gloves by the experts. Dr. Zhang started skeptical, his voice carrying clear doubt. We're expected to believe an 8-year-old can read classical Mandarin that has stumped some of the world's foremost scholars. He presented the first test, a scroll Malcolm had never seen, a medical text about treating bone fractures using extinct terminology and characters that predated modern standardization. Malcolm studied it quietly. No hesitation, no uncertainty. Then he began translating, his small voice steady and clear. This scroll describes setting broken bones using bamboo splints. The healer recommends a paste made from ground eggshells and honey to promote healing. The bones must be aligned carefully, then wrapped tightly but not so tight that blood flow stops. The patient should drink bone broth made from specific animals for strength. Perfect accuracy, nuanced understanding of medical context. Historical knowledge that shouldn't be accessible to a child. Dr. Zhang's expression shifted from skepticism to confusion. Professor Liu Wei escalated the difficulty. He presented scrolls with damaged characters, partial texts, obscure dialects that even specialized scholars struggled with. Malcolm handled each one with calm precision. Then Malcolm did something that stunned everyone. He corrected previous scholarly misinterpretations, pointing out where characters had been mistranscribed in existing academic literature. Professor Liu verified against original sources. The boy was right. The room grew tense, uncomfortable with the impossibility unfolding before them. Dr. Foster, the psychologist, leaned forward. "Malcolm, can you describe your process? When you read these scrolls, what do you experience?" Malcolm thought carefully. "I hear the healers' voices, not words exactly, but feelings and knowing. They were worried about the people they were trying to help." He pointed to one scroll. "This one feels heavy." The healer was sad because he couldn't save everyone. Dr. Foster checked his notes, then gasped quietly. Historical records confirmed that particular scroll had been written during a plague outbreak with high mortality rates. There was no way Malcolm could have known that from the text alone. Victoria Crawford, Med Farm Global's lead attorney, intervened sharply. "This could be an elaborate deception. Perhaps the child was coached on specific texts. I demand blind testing with scrolls neither Mr. Park's team nor the child has ever seen." The experts agreed. They retrieved documents from the university's rare archives, scrolls that had never been photographed, never digitized, seen by only a handful of scholars in controlled circumstances. Malcolm translated them flawlessly. Victoria Crawford's confident expression began to falter. Then, while translating one particular scroll, Malcolm paused. His small brow furrowed. "There's something strange here, like a shadow behind the words." He pointed to what appeared to be blank space on the parchment. Dr. Zhang retrieved specialized lighting equipment, the kind used to detect forgeries and restorations. Under the UV light, a hidden watermark became visible, invisible to the naked eye. Malcolm described what he saw, a seal that didn't match the document's purported origin. The experts examined it closely, cross-referencing authentication databases. Dr. Zhang's voice was stunned. "This watermark proves this scroll is a forgery, not ancient at all, created within the last 50 years using modern inks and artificially aged paper. This was in our authentication queue. We almost certified it as genuine." David Kim immediately began investigating the scroll's provenance. Within minutes, he'd traced it back to a donation made by Med Farm Global's parent company 30 years ago. Victoria Crawford went pale. Malcolm continued examining other disputed scrolls Med Farm Global had submitted as evidence. He found similar watermarks in 3 more documents, all forgeries, all designed to support their claim of prior ownership. The investigation that followed revealed everything. Med Farm Global's founder, Richard Kensington, had apprenticed under a Korean traditional medicine practitioner in the 1970s. That practitioner was a distant relative of the Park family. Kensington had gained access to partial formulas, then created elaborate forgeries to claim independent discovery. He'd built his entire company on stolen knowledge. When Park Pharmaceutical's success eventually eclipsed his, he'd manufactured the lawsuit as revenge. Malcolm's impossible translations had exposed the entire deception. The experts conferred quietly, then delivered their conclusions. Dr. Zhang spoke first. "I've studied linguistics for 30 years. What this child demonstrates is scientifically inexplicable, but it's real." Professor Liu Wei nodded. "His accuracy is beyond question. The cultural context he provides, the emotional understanding of the texts, it's unprecedented." Dr. Yamamoto added, "He's not just translating words. He's accessing the intention behind them, the spirit of the original authors." Dr. Foster's assessment was careful but definitive. Malcolm shows no signs of coaching or deception. He genuinely experiences these texts in a way unique to him. I cannot explain it medically or psychologically, but I cannot deny what I've witnessed." Dr. Hensworth concluded, "His abilities are empirically undeniable, regardless of whether we can explain them. The translations are valid and should be accepted as evidence." After hours of testing, Malcolm looked exhausted. His small shoulders slumped, his eyes heavy. Dr. Foster noticed. "Are you all right, Malcolm?" The boy's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "It's heavy. All the sadness in the scrolls. The medicine was supposed to help people, but now people are fighting and lying about it. That makes the scrolls sad. It makes me sad, too." Diane pulled him close, protective and aching for her son's burden. James felt something crack in his chest. This child carried a gift that weighed on him, yet he used it anyway because the scrolls want to be heard. There was more courage in this 8-year-old than James had shown in his entire adult life. Victoria Crawford requested a private conference with David Kim. She returned an hour later, her voice tight with barely controlled anger and defeat. In light of the findings, MedFarm Global withdraws all authenticity challenges. The Imperial Patent and Malcolm Johnson's translations will stand unchallenged. We'll be reevaluating our position on the entire lawsuit. Code 4, they knew they'd lost. Outside, reporters swarmed. James's security team created a protective corridor, but the questions came like attacks. Is it true an 8-year-old saved your company? How does he read ancient languages? Will you exploit this child's gift? James stopped. For the first time in his career, he spoke from emotion rather than calculation. Malcolm Johnson is an extraordinary child with a gift we don't fully understand. He's helped us uncover truth, not just about ancient documents, but about what really matters. He's not a tool or a curiosity. He's a remarkable person who deserves protection and respect. Anyone who tries to exploit or harm him will answer to me personally. Diane's eyes widened, surprised by his fierce protectiveness. Malcolm looked up at James and smiled slightly, a small gesture of trust that felt more valuable than any corporate victory. In the car back to the penthouse, Malcolm fell asleep against his mother, emotionally and physically exhausted. Diane whispered to James, "Thank you for protecting him in there. You didn't have to speak up like that." James watched the sleeping child, so small and yet capable of such impossible things. "Mrs. Johnson, your son saved my company, but I think he might be saving something more important." "What's that?" James paused, uncomfortable with vulnerability but pushing through. "My ability to be human again." The city lights blurred past the windows as they drove through Silicon Valley's evening traffic. Ahead lay the final court battle, but James realized the outcome mattered less than what he chose to do with victory. Malcolm had shown him that some things couldn't be measured or controlled. That wisdom flowed through unexpected vessels. That the most valuable truths often came from the most unlikely sources. The question now, would he honor that lesson? 2 weeks had passed since the expert verification. The court date arrived with the weight of finality. The federal courthouse in San Jose was packed, every seat filled with lawyers, journalists, and pharmaceutical industry executives watching the case that had captivated international attention. James sat at the plaintiff's table with David Kim and his legal team, projecting the calm confidence that had served him throughout his career. But his hands, hidden beneath the table, were clenched tight. Diane and Malcolm sat in the gallery. The boy looked nervous, despite his extraordinary gift, his small hands folded in his lap, his eyes darting around the imposing courtroom. Judge Patricia Hensworth presided, the same Qing dynasty specialist who had witnessed Malcolm's abilities during verification. Her expression was neutral, professional, revealing nothing. MedFarm Global's legal team was noticeably subdued after the verification disaster. Victoria Crawford sat with rigid posture, her usual confidence replaced by careful calculation. But they hadn't withdrawn the lawsuit. Instead, they'd pivoted to a new strategy, seeking a reduced settlement of $800 million instead of the original $2.8 billion. Their argument, even if the imperial patent was authentic, modern intellectual property law should override ancient documents. David Kim delivered the opening statement with systematic precision. The evidence is clear and irrefutable. The imperial patent has been authenticated by 5 independent institutions. Malcolm Johnson's translations have been verified by court-appointed experts. Medfarm Global's supposed evidence has been exposed as elaborate forgeries. There is a clear, unbroken chain of ownership through the Park family lineage spanning 2 centuries. Park Pharmaceutical was built legitimately on ancestral knowledge, protected by imperial decree. Victoria Crawford's counter-argument was clever. Your Honor, the imperial patent is a fascinating historical artifact, but it is not a binding modern legal document. The Qing dynasty fell in 1912. Its legal authority ended over a century ago. Modern pharmaceutical patents require different standards, different processes, different proofs. Mr. Park should be required to demonstrate that his current formula matches the historical one exactly. The burden of proof is on him to show unbroken continuity. Then she played her trump card. Victoria presented chemical analysis of Park Pharmaceutical's flagship product. The reports showed synthetic compounds, modern manufacturing processes, stabilizing agents that didn't exist in 1823. This isn't the same formula from 1823, she argued. Mr. Park has modified it extensively using contemporary chemistry. If the formula has been altered, the imperial patent doesn't apply. The chain of authenticity is broken. David Kim requested a recess to confer. In the conference room, James faced a difficult truth. The formula had been modernized. His grandfather and father had made improvements using contemporary science, enhanced effectiveness, improved shelf stability, developed better delivery methods. But the core medicinal components remained the same. Was it still the same formula? Legally, did it matter? We can argue gradual evolution, David Kim said, but it's risky. The judge might rule that substantial modification voids the original patent. James rubbed his temples, feeling the pressure of everything riding on this moment. Then he heard a small voice from the doorway. Mr. Park, can I tell you what the scrolls say? Malcolm stood there, having slipped away from his mother. Not now, Malcolm, James said, frustration sharpening his tone. This is a legal technicality. It's complicated. But Malcolm persisted with that quiet certainty James had come to recognize. That's why it matters. The healer who made the formula, he says medicine is living. It's supposed to grow and change. James stopped, turned to the boy. What do you mean? In one of the scrolls, your great-great-grandfather wrote that good medicine adapts to new knowledge. He said future generations should make it better, not keep it frozen in the past. David Kim's eyes widened. Which scroll? Can you show us? Malcolm pointed to a specific document in their evidence file, a scroll they'd previously thought contained only preparation techniques. There's a passage we didn't translate fully. It's about legacy and improvement. When court reconvened, David Kim requested permission to present additional translation. Judge Hensworth allowed it, though her expression showed surprise. Malcolm was brought to the witness stand, creating an immediate sensation in the courtroom. Dr. Foster, the child psychologist, was present to ensure appropriate treatment. Malcolm was sworn in with child-appropriate modifications, his small hand on the Bible, his voice clear as he promised to tell the truth. David Kim guided gently. Malcolm, can you read this passage for the court? Malcolm studied the scroll projected on the courtroom screen, then translated in that same steady voice that had become familiar. I give this formula to my descendants not as a fixed relic, but as a foundation. Build upon it. Improve it with new knowledge. Medicine must evolve as understanding grows. The core remains. Heal with respect for nature's wisdom. But do not fear to enhance what I began.
That is how healing progresses. The courtroom sat in stunned silence. Victoria Crawford approached for cross-examination, moving cautiously, aware of the optics of challenging a child before cameras and press. Malcolm, how can you be certain that's what the characters mean? Ancient languages can be interpreted in many ways. Malcolm met her eyes directly. I don't just read the characters, ma'am. I hear what the healer meant when he wrote them. He wanted his family to make the medicine better, not keep it the same forever. Victoria tried another angle. But you're only 8 years old. How can you understand complex medical concepts and legal intentions? Malcolm's answer was simple and profound. I don't understand all the medicine, but I understand what he felt when he wrote it, and he felt hope that future healers would be wiser than him. Judge Hensworth leaned forward, addressing Malcolm directly. Malcolm, in your understanding of these scrolls, did Park Jin-woo intend this formula to remain exactly as he created it? Malcolm shook his head. No, ma'am. He knew medicine in his time wasn't perfect. He wanted his family to keep learning, keep improving. The important part was the intention to heal, not the exact ingredients. And does the modern formula in your assessment carry that same intention? Malcolm looked at James. The pause felt eternal. Then, it does now. 2 words that carried the weight of judgment and hope. Victoria Crawford requested a conference with her client. Richard Kensington Jr., MedFarm Global's CEO, looked defeated, cornered by evidence and exposure. They returned after 20 minutes. Your Honor, Victoria's voice was tight. In light of the new evidence and the authenticated imperial patent, MedFarm Global withdraws its lawsuit in its entirety. We acknowledge the Park family's rightful ownership and offer our apologies for this unfounded challenge. Judge Hensworth's gavel came down with decisive finality. The lawsuit is dismissed with prejudice. The court finds that Park Pharmaceutical has demonstrated clear and legitimate ownership of the 5 elements formula, both in its historical form and its modern adaptation. The imperial patent stands as valid documentation of original creation and intended legacy. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. James's legal team celebrated with restrained professional joy. Diane pulled Malcolm into a tight embrace. Media flooded out to report the verdict, but James felt something unexpected. Not triumph, but sadness. He'd won. His company was saved. But Malcolm's words echoed. It does now. Meaning it hadn't before. The boy had seen through him, seen that profit and market share had become goals rather than means to healing. He'd almost lost sight of what the formula was for. Outside, at the press conference, James gave a statement that surprised even his own team. Today's verdict affirms what my ancestor created 200 years ago. But Malcolm Johnson's testimony reminded me of something more important. Why it was created. Medicine exists to heal, not to generate profit. I've lost sight of that truth. Moving forward, Park Pharmaceutical will honor the original intention behind our formula. Reporters pressed for details. We'll be establishing the Park Jin-woo Foundation to provide affordable access to our medicines for underserved communities. We'll also fund research into traditional healing methods that modern medicine has overlooked. Profit will serve healing, not the reverse. After the press conference, as the crowd dispersed, Malcolm approached James. The boy looked tired, emotionally drained from the courtroom experience, from carrying the weight of ancient wisdom in such a small frame. Mr. Park, now that the scrolls have told their story and the case is over, do Mama and I have to go back to just cleaning? Will you forget about us? The question pierced James's heart like nothing ever had. Diane's hand tightened on Malcolm's shoulder, her face showing she'd wondered the same thing. Were they just useful tools, to be discarded now that their purpose was served. James looked at this remarkable child who'd saved his company, yes, but who'd done something far more important. Malcolm had challenged his assumptions, shown him that wisdom transcends age and background, that the most valuable truths often come wrapped in the most unexpected packages. This boy, who heard whispers in ancient scrolls, had made a cynical billionaire remember what healing actually meant. He realized his sterile penthouse had felt different these past weeks, alive, warm, purposeful, because of Diane's quiet kindness and Malcolm's extraordinary presence. The corporate victory felt hollow compared to the question in Malcolm's eyes. "Will you forget about us?" James knelt down to Malcolm's eye level, a gesture that had become natural over these transformative weeks. But the answer this moment deserved required more than words spoken in a courthouse hallway. "No, Malcolm," he said quietly. "I won't forget. But let's talk about this properly, all three of us, tonight." For now, the courtroom victory was won. The legal battle was over, but the real test was just beginning. What kind of man would James choose to be? 3 days had passed since the court victory. James's penthouse felt suspended in an uncomfortable limbo. Diane and Malcolm were still there, still working as housekeeper and her son, but the tension in the air was palpable. What happens now? The question hung unspoken between them. James sat alone in his study, confronting himself in a way he'd avoided for years. His penthouse was minimalist, expensive, empty. He'd always called it efficient, uncluttered, a reflection of his focused mind. Now it felt sterile, lifeless. Before Diane and Malcolm, he'd lived like a machine. Work, sleep, repeat. No friends, no family connections, no warmth. He thought about his ex-wife, Jennifer. She'd left 8 months ago with words that still stung. "You're married to your company, not to me." He dismissed it at the time as her inability to understand ambition, to grasp what building an empire required. Now he saw the truth. She'd been right. He'd chosen profit margins over partnership, data over intimacy. He'd built a $4.2 billion empire, but lost his humanity in the process. The penthouse was just a symptom of the disease, beautiful, expensive, utterly empty. But Malcolm had somehow awakened something dormant in James. Not just gratitude for saving the company, though that was there. Something deeper, more terrifying. Genuine care for another person. The protective instinct when reporters crowded Malcolm. The pride watching him testify with quiet courage. The warmth when Malcolm smiled at him. These feelings scared James more than any lawsuit ever had. And Diane, with her quiet dignity, the way she protected Malcolm fiercely while teaching him kindness, her strength as a single mother working multiple jobs, her wisdom in letting Malcolm use his gift while ensuring he stayed grounded. James found himself looking forward to evenings when she was there. Her presence made the penthouse feel like a home. He stood at a crossroads. He could thank them, provide generous severance, send them away, return to his efficient, empty life. Or he could choose something terrifying, connection. Let these two people into his life permanently. Risk caring, risk vulnerability, risk change. James picked up his phone and called David Kim. "I need you to draft something unusual." He explained his intention. There was a long pause on the line. "James, are you sure? This is a major commitment. I've never been more certain of anything." That evening, James invited Diane and Malcolm to his study. His hands were shaking as he set up chairs. He noticed, surprised at his own nervousness. He'd negotiated billion-dollar deals without trembling, but this mattered more. They arrived, Malcolm carrying a drawing he'd made. Diane sensed something significant was coming, her posture protective. Before James could speak, Malcolm handed him the picture.
It showed three figures: a tall man, a woman, a small boy, holding hands in front of a house. Above them, in careful child's writing, "Family is where the heart learns to hear." James stared at it, emotion tightening his throat. He began awkwardly, unused to emotional honesty. "Mrs. Johnson, Malcolm, these past weeks have been extraordinary. Not just because we won the case, but because you've shown me something I'd lost." Diane listened carefully, her protective arm around Malcolm. "I built a successful company, but I built it at the cost of everything else. I've been alone for years, and I told myself that was strength, independence. But you've helped me see it was just emptiness." He turned to Malcolm. "You asked if I would forget about you. The answer is no. I couldn't if I tried. You've changed everything." James knelt to Malcolm's eye level, the gesture that had become natural between them. "I'd like to ask you and your mother something. Not as my employees, but as people I've come to care about deeply." He paused, gathering courage. "Would you consider staying here? Not in the guest quarters, but in a real home? Would you let me be part of your family?" Diane's immediate response was resistance. "Mr. Park, you've been incredibly generous already. The salary increase, the education trust for Malcolm, we can't accept more." James stood, facing her directly. "I'm not offering charity, Mrs. Johnson. I'm asking for family. I'm asking if you'd give me the chance to be more than just Malcolm's employer. To be someone who cares about both of you, who wants to support you not out of obligation, but out of genuine affection." His voice softened. "This penthouse has been a showcase for years. Beautiful, but empty. When you're here, it feels alive. When Malcolm laughs in the hallway, when you hum while preparing dinner, when I come home and it doesn't feel like a mausoleum, that's what I've been missing." He explained the practical arrangements. The West Wing had been renovated as private quarters for them. Separate entrance, full kitchen, living space. Diane would have no employment obligations. Full scholarship for Malcolm to any school they chose, plus funding for his unique educational needs. Healthcare, security, travel, everything provided. Legal documents ensuring their rights and protections. And most importantly, the freedom to leave anytime you want. This isn't a gilded cage. It's a home I'm hoping you'll choose to share. Diane's voice trembled. "Mr. Park, James, I've been alone with Malcolm since before he was born. We've survived on our own. I don't know how to let someone else in. I understand. I've been alone too. Maybe we could learn together." She looked at her son. "Misha, what do you think?" Malcolm's answer was immediate. "I want to stay, Mama. Mr. Park needs us, and we need him too." The boy approached James. "You're lonely, aren't you? Like the scrolls were lonely, waiting for someone to hear them." James felt tears prick his eyes. When had he last cried? "Yes, Malcolm, I've been very lonely. You don't have to be anymore. Mama and I know about being lonely too. But we're not lonely together. You could be not lonely with us." Diane looked between James and her son. She saw genuine emotion in James's face, not calculation or pity. Saw Malcolm's hope, his connection to this complicated man. She made her decision. "We'll try. No promises about forever, but we'll try." James exhaled, not realizing he'd been holding his breath. "That's all I'm asking. A chance." Over the next week, they transitioned. Diane and Malcolm's modest belongings looked small in the renovated wing, but they made it theirs.
Malcolm's drawings went on the walls, Diane's photos on the shelves, their personal touches transforming expensive emptiness into home. James helped Malcolm set up his room. The boy wanted his bed near the window. "So I can see the stars. They remind me of the scrolls, all the old voices singing." They established family dinners, James's first in years. Diane cooked sometimes. They ordered in others. Sometimes James attempted to help with disastrous results that made Malcolm giggle. Malcolm did homework at the kitchen island while James worked nearby. The penthouse filled with sounds it had never known. Laughter, conversation, Malcolm's endless questions about everything. James's staff noticed the change. He smiled more, softened, showed patience. He followed through on his courtroom promise, establishing the Park Jin-woo Foundation for Affordable Medicine. Malcolm helped name it, explaining what the original healer would have wanted. Their first initiative, providing free medication to underserved communities. Diane, with her background in community work, helped design outreach programs. It became a family project. James also created the Malcolm Johnson Scholarship for Children with Unexplained Gifts, funding research into extraordinary abilities without exploitation, protecting children like Malcolm while helping them understand themselves. "So other kids who hear things won't feel so alone?" Malcolm asked. "Exactly." Small moments accumulated into a life. James taught Malcolm chess, surprised by the boy's intuitive understanding. Malcolm taught James to draw, laughing at his awkward attempts. Diane shared stories of her childhood in Atlanta. James, hesitantly, shared memories of his strict father. They watched movies together, argued about pizza toppings, developed inside jokes. One evening, about a month after they'd moved in, James realized something profound. He'd been home every night for dinner. He'd turned down business trips to stay with Diane and Malcolm. He'd chosen time with them over profit opportunities, and he didn't regret any of it. His metrics for success had fundamentally changed. "Mr. Park, you're different now," Malcolm observed. "How so?" "You listen better, not just with your ears, with the quiet part inside, like I told you about the scrolls." James realized the boy was right. He was learning to hear things beyond data and logic, emotional truths, human needs, the whispers of what really mattered. Diane stopped calling him Mr. Park in private. She started to trust that his care was genuine, opened up about her fears as a single mother, her worry that Malcolm's gift would make him a target. James promised, "I'll protect him like he was my own son. I'll protect both of you." And Diane believed him. Late one night, James was working in his study when Malcolm appeared in pajamas, rubbing his eyes. "Can't sleep?" "The scrolls are quiet now. They finished their song, but I hear a new one starting." "A new song?" "Yes. It's about family and home and learning to heal yourself before you can heal others. It's your song, Mr. Park, and Mama's, and mine. We're making it together." James pulled the boy into a hug, physical affection he'd avoided for years. "I like our song, Malcolm." "Me too." As Malcolm headed back to bed, James returned to his work. But it was different now. Not all-consuming, not his only purpose, just part of a fuller life. A life with family, connection, meaning beyond profit. The ancient scrolls had brought them together, but what they were building now was entirely new, and infinitely more valuable than any empire. Thank you for staying with me until the very end of this incredible journey. If this story touched your heart, wait until you see what's coming next. It's even more powerful and inspiring than you can imagine, so don't go anywhere. Click on that video showing on your screen right now to dive into another amazing story that will absolutely blow your mind. Trust me, you won't regret it.